Hi, and welcome to this Sonicware Liven 8bit warps tutorial. Of all the comments I've been getting recently about the Liven series, the looper on the 8-bit warps has been the most requested, so that's what we'll be looking at today. You'll see here I've got a pattern loaded in as normal. This is playing back in real time on the 8-bit warps. So if we just hit play, we'll see that these buttons will change colour depending on which position we are in the pattern. So green is means it's occupied and red means it's selected. Whereas if we shift into the looper mode, this button will turn green and these extinguish. These are now our loop, playback and recording buttons. These three are recording sound from inside the 8-bit warps internally, and the last one is reserved for external sources. The way it works is that we have the pattern that's loaded can be played back and manipulated in real time, whereas the looper tracks are recorded audio and they can only be manipulated by changing their volume and pan. When in looper mode, these four knobs here become our volume and pan controls, but we'll cover the details of that later. It's important to note that these loop recordings are only recorded into RAM, so they can't be saved anywhere. Once you switch the unit off and on again, they'll be completely blank. So I've selected a few patterns from one of my old jams. So in pattern 1 we have a bass line. In patterns 3 and 4 here there's two different types of drum loop. A simple one and one with a little bit of a fill on the end. One of the things we can do in the looper is to chain patterns together. So you can create drum loops from sections of drums, for example. So I'll show that in a minute. So, and then obviously what we've already heard is the melody in this pattern. So by default the 8-bit warps only plays one pattern at a time, so the looper enables us to layer up patterns and also to chain them together. So let's get stuck in. Let's go back to pattern 1. This pattern is 16 steps long. You can see if we exit looper mode, you can see that the page buttons for the pattern, there's only one of them lit up, which means it's only occupying one page. We can also check that by going into the loop length down here, which is telling us 16 steps. So the most sensible thing to do in this case is to set the looper to also be 16 steps long. So that's what this button here is for. If you hold function and press loop, first thing you're going to see is quantize, and we'll come back to that. Length. So yeah, length 16 steps. You can adjust that with the value knob. It happens to be set at the right amount anyway. If we go into looper, all of our loops are currently empty, which is why they're all extinguished. So let's decide we want to record it into this one. So it will then start to flash. We press play. And you can see it counted down the number of steps remaining, and we've currently got our pattern playing, but it's muted. We can unmute it by holding shift. But that's quite useful. So you record a pattern as you want it, and as the pattern ends, it automatically mutes, and the recorded version starts playing, which is now in here. If we press that, it's just going to wait for us to press play, but that will play the current loaded memory and the loop together. But if we press it again, that's our recording. So if we then shift to another pattern, say one of the drums, we can press our recorded loop and play. So they're going to play together. Now, for example, if we wanted to record patterns 3 and 4 into another loop, loop 2 for example, these patterns are also 16 steps long, but let's say for example I want to play 3 of pattern 3 and then 1 of pattern 4 on the end of it. That's 64 steps. So if we go into loop again, length, and turn that all the way up to 64, we're still in looper mode. So if we press loop number 2, we arm that ready for recording, we can press play. Then as we approach, we load pattern number 4. So there we go, we've recorded pattern 3 3 times and pattern 4 once in a loop into the looper. So as it plays, it will play those as we recorded them. So let's do something a bit different with the melody. If we load up pattern 5, which is our melody, we can see that this is 64 steps long. But what we can do is we can set our loop length to be twice that, for example, and then we can create variations of the melody as it plays by tweaking various settings. So if we turn that all the way up to 128, that's going to be twice as long as our pattern. So we're still in looper mode. We can press loop number 3, ready to arm that for recording. I'm also going to turn these two on, and these will play in the background, but they won't be recorded into loop number 3. That'll just be capturing what's playing through the real-time pattern. So all the steps I've shown you so far can be done as the sequencer is playing without actually stopping it. So it's great for building things up on the fly live, so you can build patterns and overwrite them and create more content as the thing's playing. So it's great for working with live. Also, as this plays, I'll tweak the cutoff filter a bit, so the first time it plays it'll sound slightly different to the second time, like this. So then as we play that back, we'll hear all of those movements of the cutoff of the filter as we recorded them. So it's great for capturing a performance rather than having to record all those into the parameter lock, for example. So that goes for any of the real-time controls as a pattern's playing back. You can manipulate everything and record it as audio. So I have to admit to doing something pretty stupid here. I left the studio, expected to come back and work on this later, and the 8-bit warps has switched itself off because I forgot to disable the auto power function. So let's just turn it back on, and when we go into looper we'll see that all my loops are empty. So that's one pitfall that you might want to avoid when using the looper. If we go into hold function and press system, keep going around until we see auto power, it's set to an hour. So I was away for more than an hour and I lost all my work. So we can turn that up to 6, or we can go all the way down past half an hour to off. So that's where I'm going to leave it. So I've managed to recover what we were working on. We're back in the looper mode now, and we've got our 3 patterns, how we had them before. I've also loaded up this clap pattern, which is running in the real-time memory. We can just trigger our loop patterns to run free, like this. But doing that, we always run the risk of them not being in sync with each other. For example, we can trigger them to run not at the same time. And obviously that can get quite sloppy sounding. So the best thing to do is to sync them up to something that's running in real time. We do this by playing the pattern in the memory and then triggering the loops. This is where the quantize feature comes in, because it's basically syncing to a certain number of steps. So I'll play this pattern. If you notice, it always waits for the pattern to loop over before it starts. It waits 16 steps before starting here, and that is because we have our quantize set to 16. If, for example, we were to turn that down to 8, we could then get them to trigger here. Or there. So it's a discrete value, so you can trigger at any point multiples of the start of the pattern. This is also true when we're recording our loops, so the quantized value will determine where the loop starts recording from. So for example, if we're working in 4/4, which is 16 steps, you probably want to keep it to 16 so that each loop starts at the beginning, or you could decide, if you set it to 8, that you wanted to start from there, for example. Also, if we're working in other time signatures, 3/4, for example, you might have it set to 12 steps. So you might want to set the quantized value to multiples of 12. So now that we've got some sound recorded onto a looper as well, I can demonstrate the volume and pan controls. So these knobs, if you imagine they're numbered 1 to 4, that corresponds to loops numbers 1 to 4. So if we start playing loop 1 and turn this knob, we're going to alter the volume. And if we hold shift whilst turning the knob, it'll move it in the stereo field left to right. Like that. The fourth one is a bit of a special case. We'll get to show that once we've recorded something in here, but it fades between the line in and the recorded loop. So I've got this Volca set up now, and we're going to record some audio from that into the fourth looper pattern. I'm going to connect the output from the headphone socket on the Volca to the input on the 8-bit warps with this 3.5mm cable. That'll get us our audio. So I've got this hi-hat pattern going. Now we could run a cable from the sync out to the sync in, which is one option to get them running at the same speed. But the only problem with that is I'd have to hit play at exactly the right moment on this at step 1 to get everything to line up properly. And with this clap pattern, having no note playing on step 1, that's going to be quite hard. So instead, we're going to run a MIDI cable from the MIDI out on the 8-bit warps into the MIDI in on the Volca. So what will happen now when we press play is they'll both start at the same time. One potential pitfall is the Liven 8-bit warps also sends note data over its MIDI out, so you might have to change the MIDI channel that this is set to. At the moment they're not clashing, but if I change the MIDI transmission channel to 10, we're going to hear we're triggering some notes there. So you must be careful that this doesn't match this. Once again, if we go back into looper mode, and we can go into loop, change the length, make sure that's 16. We can hit record here, and then play on the 8-bit warps. So that's now our loop version of the Volca running. I can demonstrate the fact that that's the case by disconnecting the audio completely. So you can see that audio is coming straight out of the 8-bit warps. So now we can use that along with our other patterns, all played in sync with each other. So just to demonstrate the difference between knob number 4 and the other 3 in looper mode, I'll just reconnect the Volca and play a different pattern in. And you can hear at the moment we've got silence. That's because this has automatically turned itself all the way up. And as we turn it down, we hear that's the input and that's the output. So if I play and do that again, that's coming directly from this. And we can crossfade between the input and the output. This again holding shift, and this will pan our fourth loop. So just a couple more functions to wrap up. If we play a pattern and then hold record and press a loop, it will overwrite the contents of the loop without having to empty it. Like that. If we hold clear/cancel and press a loop button, we will erase the contents of that loop. So yeah, I think that about covers everything. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and it teaches you everything you need to know about the looper on the 8-bit warps. Please leave a comment and like and subscribe. Thanks very much for watching.